One summer evening, my friends and I decided to spontaneously plan a getaway. With the hectic work schedule, classes, and everyday life stress, it was time for a weekend escape. We left early in the morning and headed to a small coastal town. The place wasn't far, but the drive was great for chatting, listening to music, and soaking in the beauty of nature. We hadn't relaxed like this in a long time. When we arrived at the town, we stepped onto the small but peaceful beach by the sea. The salty scent of the water, the sound of the waves, and the golden hues of the setting sun. Everything felt like a painting. We were eager to swim. It was past 6 in the evening, the sun was starting to set, and we made our way towards the shore. We were having such a good time that we didn't even realize how much time had passed. We got in the water, and it was so beautiful and refreshing that I wanted to stay in it for hours. A few of my friends swam a little farther out, and I started to swim parallel to the shore by myself. Suddenly, I noticed some movement in the distance. At first, I ignored it, but as I got closer, I saw something in the waves. Or someone. I pulled back slightly and looked more carefully. Yes, someone was in the water, but something seemed wrong. The person was struggling. I quickly turned back to my friends and pointed it out. Someone's drowning. Someone shouted. We all panicked at that moment. But we were frozen, not knowing what to do, just looking at each other. We didn't recognize anyone in the water, but someone was clearly in trouble. We rushed to the shore. We ran to the water's edge, but the man was still too far out. It seemed like he was losing strength, unable to move. In a rush of adrenaline, I jumped into the water, but fear crept into me. I'd never faced something like this before. All I could see by the riverbank was the young man's face, and the fear in that face. The situation was getting worse. Meanwhile, a friend of mine pulled out his phone and called emergency services. We slowly managed to get him to shore. The man was so exhausted that at first, he didn't even seem to realize what was going on. My friend was calling for an ambulance, and I stayed by the man's side, trying to calm him down. I had no idea what to say, what to do. But somehow, I was trying to reassure him. He could barely speak, but I asked, "Why did you get in the water?" He couldn't respond. He was so tired, just taking deep breaths. I kept talking to him, trying to comfort him, but I was still filled with fear. Would we make it in time? Did we really call for help in time? While I waited for the response from the ambulance, I watched the man closely. It was clear that he was deteriorating by the second. Finally, the ambulance arrived quickly. It felt like the world stopped for a moment. The paramedics immediately attended to the young man. His blood pressure was low, and his heart rate was rapid, but they managed to save him before it was too late. After a while, preparations were made to take him to the hospital. I saw him once more, in the back of the ambulance, with a faint smile on his face. "Thank you," he said. Those words, so simple, but so meaningful, stayed with me. After that, he disappeared from view, but that moment would never leave me. A few weeks later, I began to accept that there was a secret behind everything that had happened. Since that day, I felt like something in my life had changed. Everywhere I went, there was a shadow, and I felt like someone was watching me all the time. Whenever the face of that young man appeared in my mind, it no longer seemed like just a rescue moment, but something that carried a hidden message. It was a test for you. His words echoed in my head, but what was the test? What for? And who was it for? One night, I suddenly found myself deciding to head out to a place far from the town. The beach that night, the place where everything had started. Maybe I could find something there. Maybe the answers to my questions were at that very spot, by the sea. In the darkness of the night, I made my way to a secluded beach, not far from the town, but hidden enough to be away from the eyes of others. The chill of the night air hit my face, and the salty scent of the sea, along with the sound of the waves, felt closer than ever before. The moonlight barely lit the beach, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch out into the darkness. I walked along the shoreline, my footsteps barely audible in the quiet. There was a sense of eeriness in the air, as though the ocean itself was holding a secret, waiting to reveal it to me. I stopped, staring out at the water, trying to make sense of everything. What had really happened that day? And why did I feel like I was being drawn back here? Just as I was about to turn back, I saw it. In the distance, near the water's edge, there was a figure. It wasn't clear at first, just a silhouette against the night, but my heart skipped a beat. I knew that figure. It was him, the young man from the water. He was standing at the edge of the shore, his back to me, looking out at the sea. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. How was this possible? Wasn't he supposed to be recovering in the hospital? I hesitated, unsure whether to approach, but something compelled me to take a step forward. As I did, he turned slowly, his eyes locking with mine. There was no surprise, no shock in his expression, as if he had been expecting me. "You shouldn't have come here," he said softly, his voice almost lost to the sound of the waves crashing against the rocks. I was stunned. What are you doing here?" "You are supposed to be in the hospital," I stammered. He smiled faintly, but there was something unsettling about it. "I never needed the hospital," he said, taking a step closer. "What you saved wasn't me." It was never me. My heart raced, a mix of confusion and fear flooding through me. "What are you talking about? Who are you?" I demanded, trying to stay calm, though my voice trembled. "I'm the one who tested you," he replied. "But you're not ready for the truth yet. You never will be." I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. This wasn't the conversation I had expected. Tested me? For what? Why me? What do you want from me? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he just stared at me, as if studying my every reaction. "You think it's over," he said finally, "but it's only just beginning. You've been marked. You're part of something much larger than you realize." I took a step back, a wave of dread washing over me. "What do you mean? What's happening?" But he didn't answer. Instead, he turned and walked away slowly, disappearing into the shadows of the night, as if he was part of the darkness itself. I stood there, motionless, my mind racing. What had just happened? Had it been real? Was he truly there, or had my mind finally cracked under the weight of all the stress and confusion? I stayed on the beach for hours, staring at the water, waiting for some kind of sign, some clarity. But there was nothing. Only the sound of the waves and the occasional gust of wind that made the trees sway. As I left the beach, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just been part of something far greater than. I understood, something that was watching, waiting, and now pulling me deeper into its web. The next few days were a blur. I couldn't focus on anything. My mind kept drifting back to that moment on the beach, to the young man's cryptic words, to the idea that I had been tested. The strangest part was that I couldn't find any trace of him after that night. There were no reports, no hospital visits, no signs of anyone matching his description. It was as though he had never existed. But I knew what I had seen, and I knew that I had not been hallucinating. The dreams started soon after. At first, they were subtle, fleeting images of water, shadows, and distant voices. But over time, they grew more vivid, more disturbing. I saw flashes of the young man's face, his eyes wide with fear, and then the darkness swallowing him whole. I heard whispers in the dark, voices that seemed to call my name, urging me to follow them. I tried to ignore it, But the dreams grew more intense, more real. And each morning, I woke up feeling as though something was pulling me toward the water, toward the place where it all began. These turned into weeks, and I found myself drawn back to that beach, unable to resist the pull. I knew I had to understand what was happening, even if it meant facing something I wasn't ready for. Something kept whispering to me, "There's more. There's always more." One evening, I stood once more at the water's edge, staring into the depths, waiting for the next sign, the next clue. And then, just as before, I saw him again standing at the edge of the waves, his back to me. This time, he didn't turn. This time, there was no smile, no cryptic words. He simply stood there, waiting for me to come closer, and for the first time, I realized that I wasn't just looking for answers. I was being pulled into something far deeper, a cycle that I could no longer escape. The test had begun. But what would happen when it was over? Would I survive? Or would I, too, disappear into the darkness? Just another piece of the puzzle I couldn't comprehend. I took a step toward him, the water lapping at my feet, my heart pounding. There was no turning back now. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Stay tuned for more strange and surprising stories every week. See you next time.